You wake up in a darkness that is not silence, but a held breath. The air carries a strange stench, not rot, but something metallic, clinical, like blood scrubbed with bleach. That sterile odor clings to your throat, as if someone tried to erase the history of bodies but left their fingerprints sealed into the walls. You inhale, and the air tastes like an abandoned hospital, like a morgue dressed in purity. And then you understand, cleanliness can also be a mask for violence. The floor beneath you is cold, smooth, too perfect, as if polished again and again to hide what had happened here. Which is worse, the blood that spilled, or the obsession to erase it? The wound itself, or the silence that buries it? You wonder if this chamber is a sanctuary, or a tomb. Fear thickens because no human presence lingers but yours, and yet you feel eyes. That slimy sensation of being observed without ever seeing the watcher, like an insect pinned beneath glass. Your breath becomes an echo, your body an accusation. Are you the prisoner here, or the witness condemned to remain silent? Every second weighs like a verdict. The shadows stretch long, the walls seem to breathe with you. And within that shared rhythm, you uncover the most terrifying truth. This place does not greet you as a stranger. No, it seems to recognize you. As if you had been here before, as if your silence had already signed a pact with this sterile stench. Because what is erased always returns. What is clean leaves a scar. And what you refuse to name becomes the prison you live inside. The silence tempts you, like a locked door that whispers your name. You know you shouldn't move, yet curiosity coils through your veins like venom. Every shadow here is a warning, yet the human heart is foolish. It longs to touch what it fears. And so, against the weight of dread, you lean closer to the walls, searching for a trace. Your fingers skim the surface, and beneath the cold polish you feel it. Tiny grooves, almost invisible. Scratches. Desperate, clawing marks etched into the stone. Not decoration, but testimony. Someone was here before you, and they tried to write their pain into the walls. But the grooves end abruptly, as if silenced mid-scream. What hand forced them to stop? The sterile air thickens, carrying something beneath its false cleanliness. A memory, faint but insistent, of sweat and ash, of voices pressed into nothing. The scent reminds you of rituals no one dares speak of, where knowledge itself was punished, where curiosity was branded as guilt. You ask yourself, why does the forbidden attract so powerfully? Perhaps because what is hidden promises truth. Perhaps because silence is more unbearable than horror. And in that thought, you realize the cruelest trap. Your desire to know is the very chain that binds you here. But the cruelty was only beginning. It begins with a whisper, your name dissolving into air, syllables stolen before they leave your lips. At first you resist, clutching at the fragile letters as if they were bone, but the silence here is hungrier than memory. Soon you cannot recall if you were ever called anything at all. The walls seem to breathe in your struggle, mocking you with their scars. You think of those who came before, their scratches carved into stone not as names, but as the last evidence that they existed. The body can endure hunger, chains, even pain, but what happens when your identity is stripped away? When you are reduced not to a prisoner, but to something nameless, a shadow in sterile air? History has always known this cruelty. Empires erase names to erase souls. Power survives not by killing the body, but by unweaving the self. It is the same logic of ledgers, of numbers replacing faces, of graves marked only with silence. To be unnamed is to be unmade. You feel it now, your voice thinning, your reflection trembling into obscurity. And in that moment, a question carves itself into your mind. If no one remembers you, did you ever truly live? The darkness answers with stillness, but beneath it, something sharp stirs, because what they strip away in names, they cannot fully bury in flesh. The first cut is not on your skin, it is on your world. Isolation carves through you like a blade sharpened by silence. The walls no longer feel solid. They pulse with your heartbeat, enclosing you in a coffin that pretends to be a room. Time bleeds away, drop by drop, until you can no longer tell whether you are awake or drowning in a fevered dream. You reach for sound, but there is none. Your voice cracks against the air, swallowed whole before it can echo. The absence of response is more brutal than a scream. It is rejection so absolute it gnaws at your bones. Sartre once said hell is other people, but here you learn a darker truth. Hell is their silence. And silence, in its cruelty, mutates. It does not simply surround you, it enters you. It feeds on your doubts, grows teeth inside your chest. You begin to hear whispers that are not yours, doubts braided into hallucination. Every flicker of shadow becomes a phantom, every beat of your heart a hammer against the cell of your mind. You think back to the names already stripped, to the grooves in the stone, and realize this was always the design: break the voice, then break the self. The first cut is only the beginning, and the blade is far from finished. And then, without warning, the silence ruptures. A flood of noise crashes into you like a tidal wave of broken glass. It is not music, not voices, but a chaos of sounds stitched together, boots striking metal, sobs choked into rags, doors slamming like gunfire. The chamber quakes with echoes that don't belong to the present, as though the walls themselves have learned to replay the torments they once absorbed. You cover your ears, but the noise seeps through bone. It drills into the marrow, a storm that makes your thoughts stutter and collapse. You long for the silence you once feared, but it has been twisted into a cruel trick. First they drowned you in absence, now they drown you in excess. Amid the storm, fragments of words emerge, pleas, confessions, names already erased. They surge and vanish before you can grasp them, like the last breaths of those who were silenced. Each cry feels aimed at you, demanding that you remember what history insists on burying. But memory itself begins to fracture under the weight of the cacophony. And in that breaking point, you finally understand: the worst prison is not silence, and not noise, it is the oscillation between them, the weaponization of both, until your mind no longer knows which is real. But the torment is sharpening, preparing for something far more intimate. Your thoughts splinter like glass under a boot. What was once a steady stream of inner voice now fractures into shards, each piece cutting you from within. One fragment insists you are still whole. Another hisses that you were erased long ago. A third whispers things you cannot repeat, words too foreign to be yours, yet they nest inside your skull like parasites. This is how the mind unravels, not with fire, but with doubt. You try to hold on to a single idea, a single truth, but it slips like water through trembling fingers. Identity itself becomes liquid, spilling into the cracks carved by silence and noise. You are no longer certain if you think, or if you are merely being thought. The room bends with your disorientation. Shadows crawl where light should not reach. The grooves in the wall, once testimony, now writhe like veins, pulsing in time with your confusion. Even your own body feels foreign, hands twitching as though they belong to someone else, a mouth opening but releasing only echoes. And in that descent you realize the cruelty's purpose: break the mind, and the body follows. Shatter thought, and the prisoner becomes their own executioner. Yet still, a thin question claws its way through the chaos. If thought is fractured, who is asking the question? Who remains behind the ruin? The answer waits in the next wound. You see it first in the dark, a smile. Not warm, not human, something stretched too wide, carved into the void like a scar that refuses to heal. It is the smile of the experiment, the grin of those who built this chamber of erasures and wounds. It tells you that your suffering is not an accident. It was designed. The smile belongs to no face, yet you feel it pressing against you, watching as if your torment were a performance. Power, after all, thrives on theater. Foucault warned that control is spectacle, that the body becomes a stage where cruelty rehearses itself endlessly. And here you are, the unwilling actor, stripped of name, voice, and thought, performing agony for an audience that will never admit it exists. You want to scream at the smile, to demand why. But the grin only widens, amused that you still think reason lives here. Its silence is its laughter. Its permanence is its cruelty. For the experiment does not need to justify itself, it only needs to endure long enough for you to break. And as you stare into that smile, a grotesque realization blooms. The pain is not proof of failure, but proof of success. The collapse of the self is the result they always desired. Yet the experiment is not finished. The next act waits with sharpened teeth. It begins as a whisper, soft as dust, obey. At first you resist, clutching the remnants of self like a child clutching a torn photograph. But hunger seeps deeper than defiance. Days, if days still exist, stretch into an ache that is not just in the body but in the will. The command to obey becomes sweeter than water, more nourishing than bread. You discover the cruelest trick: obedience does not feel like chains. It feels like relief. To stop choosing, to stop resisting, to surrender thought, that is the temptation. And the more you starve for meaning, the more intoxicating submission becomes. The experiment smiles again, not with fangs but with promises. Safety. Belonging. A place among the nameless. Your mind recoils, but your body leans forward. Because hunger is not just for food, it is for recognition, for the warmth of being seen, even by your captor. And so obedience wears a mask of mercy. To kneel feels almost like being held. Yet in that bending of the spine, you sense the last fracture. The line between survival and betrayal blurs until you no longer know which side of it you stand on. And the question coils tighter: is obedience the end of suffering, or the beginning of a darker kind? The answer approaches, carved in the shadow of the final collapse. Your body betrays you first. Tremors ripple through your hands, not from cold, but from a war waged beneath your skin. The chamber no longer needs chains. Your flesh has become the restraint. Hunger twists your stomach into knots, thirst dries your tongue into sandpaper, exhaustion drags your limbs like anchors. The battlefield is not outside, it is you. Every sensation mutinies. Pain blooms where there should be numbness, weakness masquerades as comfort, and even your breath turns into a weapon, short, shallow, ragged, carving you from the inside out. You begin to understand, survival is not strength here, but surrender to the body's demands. Yet even this surrender feels poisoned. For when the body bends, the spirit follows. Each spasm, each shiver, each collapse onto the cold floor is a sermon preached by your own flesh. You will obey, you will break, you will vanish. And still, a sliver of defiance clings. You ask yourself, if my body becomes their instrument, what remains of me? Am I the battlefield, or am I the casualty? The body, once a vessel of freedom, is now the proof of captivity. And as you lie there, trembling, you realize, the body does not lie. It remembers every cruelty. And memory, carved into flesh, cannot be erased so easily. But the collapse has only begun to deepen. It comes quietly, almost mercifully, the sense that they no longer cut the body, but something deeper. The blade slips past flesh, past bone, into the marrow of what you once called a soul. You cannot see it, yet you feel it, a surgery without anesthesia, a dissection of your very being. Each memory is pried loose like a rib, each belief scalpeled until it bleeds out. You thought the body was the final frontier, but the true theater of cruelty lies within. The experiment was never satisfied with breaking skin. It wants to unmake essence. To carve obedience into spirit, to erase rebellion from the core. This is no longer torture of nerves. It is the architecture of identity being dismantled, brick by trembling brick. You feel yourself hollowing, emptied of will. The silence returns, but now it is inside you, a vast vacancy where once there were dreams. And still, the knife carves not with steel but with design, forcing you to wonder if the soul is fragile enough to be rewritten, or if it ever existed at all. The wound left behind is not seen in mirrors. It lingers in thought, in the echo of who you once were. And in that hollow space, the question bleeds eternal. What survives when the soul is placed under the knife? The answer waits, heavy and merciless, in the shadow of the final collapse. They scatter inside you like broken glass, fragments of meaning, sharp enough to wound, too small to hold. You try to piece them together, desperate to rebuild a sentence, a memory, a self. But each shard cuts deeper, reminding you that coherence has been stolen. What remains is not truth, but splinters. You hear them in whispers, half-formed words, unfinished prayers, scraps of philosophy once spoken in brighter rooms. Foucault, Sartre, names that flutter like torn pages, their warnings reduced to echoes. Power is theater, hell is silence. Yet the meanings fracture before you can anchor them, dissolving like ash in water. The cruelty is clear now. It is not to erase everything, but to leave you with ruins. To burden you with fragments sharp enough to haunt, too incomplete to heal. You live inside half-remembered thoughts, a museum of broken context. And in that museum, every fragment mocks you with the ghost of what once was whole. You ask yourself, is survival only this? To breathe among shards, to carry fragments that can never be assembled? Or is there a darker truth, that even fragments can be weaponized, reshaped into a story you never chose? The pieces glitter in the dark, waiting, and you realize, the final collapse will come not with silence, but with meaning itself devoured. The mirror arrives without glass. It is not an object but a sensation, the weight of being watched, the reflection of cruelty pressed back into your skin. You realize with horror that every torment was never only about you. It was a performance staged so you could see what power truly is when masks are stripped away. And what stares back at you is monstrous, yet familiar. The cruelty is not alien, it is human, unbearably human. You see it in the smirk of history, in the rituals of empire, in the silence of neighbors who pretend not to hear. The chamber is no invention, it is merely the mirror, polished to force you to look. You search for your face, but all you find is theirs. Your suffering becomes their smile, your collapse their triumph. You understand, then, cruelty does not thrive in shadows, it thrives in reflections, in the audience that chooses to look away. The mirror whispers, this is not a nightmare, but a memory. The cruelty you see here is the same that builds nations, that hides behind laws, that wears the mask of order while carving wounds in silence. And as the reflection consumes you, one truth sears itself into your hollowed core, what you fear in them, already waits within you. It happens slowly, then all at once, the collapse of the human shape. You feel it first in your posture, the spine bending under invisible weight, shoulders folding as though the body itself rejects its design. The chamber does not need chains, it teaches you to unmake yourself. To crawl, to shrink, to blur the line between person and shadow. Your hands betray you next. No longer instruments of creation, they twitch like broken tools, unsure whether they belong to you or to the experiment. The mouth follows, words dissolving into stammers, vowels collapsing into breath. What was once language becomes residue, a ghost of speech. The mirror of cruelty showed you what power does. Now the collapse shows you why it works. To strip dignity until the body is no longer a self but a husk. To reduce humanity into postures of surrender. To sculpt silence into flesh. You see it in yourself, your shape bending into what they always intended, not a prisoner, not even a victim, but an object molded by fear. And yet, inside the ruin, a whisper flickers: if the human shape can collapse, can it also rebuild? Or is this fall irreversible, a final descent into unbeing? The question trembles, unanswered, as the last remnants of your form dissolve into the waiting dark. The conclusion arrives like a secret you were never meant to hear. It does not roar, it seeps, quiet and merciless, into the hollow spaces carved within you. You realize the chamber was never only about pain. Pain was only the tool. The true design was revelation, to strip, to fracture, to mirror, until you could no longer deny the forbidden truth. The cruelty you suffered was not theirs alone. It is ours. Civilization itself is built on these silent rooms, on erased names, on obedience disguised as order. What you endured is not an aberration, it is the blueprint. The sterile stench, the fractured thoughts, the collapse of the human shape, these are not nightmares, but memories of humanity's foundation. And so the forbidden conclusion rises like smoke. There is no safe distance between you and the chamber. You carry it in your body, in your silence, in your history. You are not the witness of cruelty, you are its heir. The thought burns unbearable. You want to cast it away, but it clings, whispering that to live is to inherit violence, and to remain silent is to perpetuate it. The chamber fades, but its scar does not. And in that scar, a final voice remains: what you have seen is not a curse, it is the truth you were never meant to face. It does not end with freedom. It ends with an echo. Long after the chamber dissolves, long after the walls and scars fade into shadow, something lingers inside you, an aftersound that refuses silence. It is not a voice, not even a word, but a resonance. The echo of cruelty, carried like marrow, vibrating through every breath you take. You try to walk away, but the ground remembers. You touch a door, and the cold is the same as the floor where you once collapsed. You hear laughter in the distance, and it bends into the grin of the experiment. Even the mirror of water reflects not your face, but the flicker of suffering you once witnessed. The chamber follows, not as place, but as inheritance. This is the cruelest revelation: torment does not vanish. It transforms into silence, into fear, into the way your body stiffens at shadows, the way your voice falters when truth rises to your lips. The echo makes you both survivor and carrier, a vessel of memory that history would rather erase. And still, in that echo, there is warning. Because what has been done once can be done again. The scar sings to you, do not forget. For forgetting is the soil where cruelty grows anew. So you walk forward, hollow yet haunted, carrying not release but resonance, the echo that remains when the human shape finally collapses.